America spent the 1940s worshipping Ingrid Bergman, then opened the next decade by denouncing her on the floor of the United States Senate as, and I quote, a powerful influence for evil. Nothing else changed in between. Same woman, same country, barely a year apart, and the only new ingredients amounted to one love affair and a truly heroic quantity of hypocrisy. You've probably heard the compressed version of this story. Swedish actress falls for Italian director, and a scandalized America slams the door. That telling survives because it fits on a thumbnail, and it collapses the second you poke at it, which happens to be my favorite genre of history. No immigration authority ever barred Bergman from entering the United States, not once, not for a single day. She still spent 7 years in exile, cut off from her daughter and from an American public that once regarded her as something close to holy. So how does a nation talk itself into destroying its favorite actress over a romance, then apologize for it in the congressional record 22 years later? Contradictions, mostly. The public demanded saints and punished a human being for failing to be a statue. Newspapers wept for a wronged husband who, behind closed doors, refused his wife a divorce and later spent years blocking her from her own child. And one senator from Colorado decided the federal government ought to license actors the way it licenses pharmacists. We'll come to him later, I promise, because the man deserves his own section and he's going to receive one. Before any of that, we need to measure what America believed it owned. The fury of 1950 only becomes legible against the worship that preceded it, and the worship began with a producer who did something genuinely rare in Hollywood. He declined to put his new star on a leash. Bergman arrived in Hollywood in 1939 to shoot the English-language remake of Intermezzo for producer David O. Selznick, and she arrived on unusual terms. Selznick agreed not to force her into the standard, restrictive studio contract that bound practically every other star in town, a detail preserved in Donald Spoto's biography, Notorious, which I'll be leaning on throughout this video. In a company town built on ownership, she kept a measure of freedom. File that away, because freedom becomes the entire problem later. Through the 1940s, her fame climbed to altitudes that modern celebrity culture, for all its machinery, struggles to reach. Casablanca in 1942 fixed her permanently into film history, and Gaslight brought her an Academy Award 2 years after that. Audiences settled on a reputation for natural beauty and grace that gradually hardened into something far less forgiving. Then came the roles that caused the real damage. She wore a nun's habit as Sister Benedict in The Bells of Street, marries in 1945, and 3 years later she burned at the stake as Joan of Arc, an actual canonized saint, in the film of the same name. Film historian David Thompson later pinpointed exactly why the coming scandal exploded on the scale it did. The American public expected Bergman to behave like her saintly screen personas rather than like an ordinary working actress. Read that sentence twice. Audiences watched a woman pretend to be a nun for a salary, then felt personally betrayed when she declined to live like one off the clock. Our era would call the arrangement parasocial, though nobody in 1949 possessed the word. The word they reached for instead sat rather closer to evil. None of this happened by design, mind you, though nobody dismantled the trap either. Studios of the era sold personas as much as performances. The public bought them wholesale, and the distance between an actress and her characters quietly collapsed somewhere along the way. Bergman played virtue so convincingly that America filed her under it. Filing errors of that sort rarely end well. By the end of 1948, Bergman held the strangest job in America, professional saint. And professional saints, as Joan of Arc herself could testify from personal experience, tend to meet fire sooner or later, usually supplied by the same crowd that lit the candles. Every saint requires a respectable domestic backdrop, and Bergman's came in the form of Petter Lindström, a Swedish dentist who later retrained as a neurosurgeon, which tells you something about the man's appetite for discipline. They married in July 1937, and their daughter Pia followed a year later. To the press and public, Lindström looked like the ideal consort. Steady, serious, quietly accomplished, the sensible anchor beside a luminous wife. Behind the front door, biographers describe a rather different arrangement. Spoto's account paints Lindström as relentlessly critical and domineering, a man who controlled the household finances and left his wife feeling inhibited and emotionally starved. Bergman raised the subject of divorce well before any Italian entered the frame. Lindström refused, a fact confirmed decades later in his own Guardian obituary, of all places. Pia deserves a pause here, before the story sweeps her aside the way 1950 did. Born in 1938, she spent her earliest years as the daughter of Hollywood's most adored actress, an enviable position right up until the moment it inverted overnight. Remember her name. The press will shortly weaponize it, and the weaponizing will involve precious little concern for her actual welfare. Now, an unhappy marriage in Hollywood barely qualified as news, and I want to be careful here. Divorce among the film colony's elite raised almost nobody's eyebrows. Stars swapped spouses with the casual rhythm of contract renewals. What converted this particular unhappiness into a landmine involved two ingredients working together: a husband unwilling to dissolve the union amicably, and a wife the public refused to imagine as anything short of immaculate. Hold on to both, because they detonate together shortly. In 1948, Bergman watched two films by the Italian director Roberto Rossellini, Rome, Open City, and Paisan, and neither resembled anything Hollywood manufactured. Rossellini worked in the neo-realist style, shooting war and survival with a rawness that studio pictures never approached, and the honesty of it knocked something loose in her. Deeply moved, she responded the way any of us might after a life-rearranging film. She wrote the director a fan letter. And what a letter. She introduced herself as a Swedish actress who speaks English very well, still remembers her German, struggles to be understood in French, and in Italian knows exactly two words: ti amo, I love you. The letter closed with the announcement that she stood ready to come and work with him, and if signing off a professional inquiry with a declaration of love strikes you as a loaded gun on the mantelpiece, congratulations. You've already guessed the third act. Rossellini answered yes. By the spring of 1949, Bergman traveled to Stromboli, a volcanic speck in Italy's Aeolian Islands, to star in a film named after the island itself. With Rossellini directing and the resident volcano supplying atmosphere free of charge, one married Hollywood icon, one married Italian director, one active volcano, zero chaperones. Even the geography reads like foreshadowing. Events on Stromboli unfolded roughly the way that letter promised. During filming, Bergman and Rossellini, both married to other people, began a full-blown romance, and their remote island proved rather less private than either of them hoped. Paparazzi flocked to the place specifically to catch them, and the romance leaked to the international press with the speed of men who understood exactly what a photograph like that could buy. Only the volcano showed discretion. Consider the mechanics of that leak for a moment. A director shoots on a remote island because remoteness suits the picture, and the same remoteness turns every arriving photographer into an occupying force. Privacy on Stromboli lasted about as long as the good weather. Long before any announcement, the affair already ranked as an international story, and the next revelation converted it into a moral referendum. Then the scandal escalated into detonation. Bergman, the screen's most beloved nun, a woman the American public treated as practically canonized, turned out to be pregnant with Rossellini's child while still legally married to Lindstrom. Once filming wrapped, she informed her husband that she would not return to the United States. On the 2nd of February, 1950, she gave birth to a son, Roberto, promptly nicknamed Robertino, presumably because one Roberto per household never suffices. Attempt a modern equivalent and you'll still undersell it. Nothing about this resembled a contemporary celebrity split, tidily managed through matching publicist statements. The most trusted woman in American cinema left her husband, her daughter, her career, and her adopted country for a director she first contacted using the words "ti amo," and the newborn proof of it landed on front pages around the world. Time magazine covered the birth. So, in their own fashion, did the pulpits of America, and the pulpits proved far harder to charm. The American reaction skipped past disapproval and settled into something closer to a national exorcism. Column after column poured sympathy onto Dr. Lindstrom, the wronged husband, the abandoned man, while accusing Bergman of callously deserting her defenseless daughter. That framing sold papers beautifully while inverting a healthy portion of the facts. I'll set the jokes down for a moment, because this next part deserves none. Lindstrom sued Bergman for desertion and waged a custody battle so bitter that it legally prevented her from seeing Pia at all. Mother and daughter would not stand in the same room again for 7 years, until 1957 in Rome. Whatever your verdict on Bergman's choices, and the era issued verdicts freely, a woman lost access to her child for most of a decade, while newspapers cast her as the abandoner. Sit with that one. The Church is mobilized next. Contrary to yet another durable myth, the Vatican never issued a formal judicial ruling against her, but the Catholic press needed no decree to swing into action. L'Osservatore Romano, the Vatican's own newspaper, joined prominent clergy in condemning her conduct, and reports from the period level an accusation, I promise you, appears in the record. Erotic vagrancy. Erotic vagrancy. For a condemnation, it borders on flattery, conjuring a woman roaming the countryside, seducing the innocent at random, a sort of one-woman charisma epidemic. Outrage converted into economics, as outrage tends to. Religious watchdog groups organize boycotts of Stromboli across the United States, kneecapping the film commercially in the very market that once queued for anything carrying her name. The saint business, it turns out, operates on strict warranty terms. Break character once and the customers demand a refund. And then the United States Senate joined in, which is the point in the story where new listeners usually assume I've begun inventing things. I haven't. On the 14th of March, 1950, Senator Edwin C. Johnson, Democrat of Colorado, rose on the Senate floor and delivered a lengthy, vitriolic denunciation of a film actress. His target held no state secrets and ran no crime syndicate. Her offense amounted to falling in love with the wrong man on the wrong island, and for that the world's most powerful deliberative body cleared an afternoon. Johnson branded her conduct an assault upon the institution of marriage and described her as one of the most powerful women on earth today, before adding, with what I can only assume involved a theatrical pause, I regret to say, a powerful influence for evil. A sitting senator, in the official record, labeled a film star an influence for evil. Cinema criticism has rarely reached such heights since. The speech also tells you something about 1950 America that statistics never quite capture. A Senate wrestling with the Cold War and the anxieties of the atomic age still located floor time for one actress's marriage. Priorities reveal themselves under pressure. By that measure, Ingrid Bergman's love life ranked among the Republic's pressing threats, which perhaps explains why the proposed remedy proved equally unhinged. Because Johnson brought a remedy, and this detail history mostly misplaced, he proposed a federal licensing system, administered by the Department of Commerce, under which actors and producers would need government licenses simply to work, commit a crime involving moral turpitude, or publicly admit to conduct that qualified, and the department could revoke the license, and with it the career. Picture losing your permission to act over an affair. Then picture what fraction of 1950 Hollywood survives that audit. The bill never became law, though a sitting senator proposing it at all still reads like satire. To be fair to Johnson, and believe me, I'm straining, he channeled an existing national mood rather than conjuring one from nothing. To be fair to everybody else, the mood he channeled wanted government-issued morality permits for artists in a country that wrote free expression into its founding documents. Both statements hold. Contradictions again, you'll notice, and this story never runs short of them. A reasonable question interrupts here. Why did nobody speak up for her? Hollywood earned fortunes off this woman, and the town famously protects its investments, yet the studios stayed silent to a man. The answer lives in the machinery of the era, so bear with me for a short detour into how the film industry of 1950 actually functioned. Start with the Production Code, better known as the Hays Code, and enforced by the Production Code Administration, which dictated what American films could depict. Under its rules, adultery could never appear sympathetic on screen, and audiences who marinated in that morality for decades extended the logic outward, expecting stars to obey off-camera whatever their characters obeyed on it. Bergman broke the code in her private life rather than in a script. The audience prosecuted both the same way. Stacked the studio contracts on top. Morality clauses ran through the standard agreements, provisions letting a studio fire talent instantly over public scandal, so a star's job security depended on behaving or, at minimum, concealing. Then widen the lens to the country itself. Post-war America leaned hard into conservative family values, an atmosphere in which a woman initiating divorce carried stigma and a pregnancy outside marriage carried far more. Hanging over all of it sat the House Un-American Activities Committee, running its aggressive investigations into the industry at that precise moment and leaving the studios terrified of any controversy that might invite federal attention or fresh boycotts. Defending Bergman meant volunteering to fight Congress, the churches, the press, and the box office at once. Nobody volunteered. Spoto renders the verdict plainly. The studios proved wholly unwilling to defend her, and so the most bankable woman in American film faced her country's fury completely alone. Time to deal honestly with the title of this video. Ingrid Bergman never faced a legal ban on entering the United States, full stop. No immigration authority blacklisted her, no federal statute named her, and the licensing scheme died without becoming law, so on paper nothing whatsoever barred the door. What she faced instead operated beneath the federal level and above the personal one, a patchwork of municipal censorship, industry cowardice, press hounding, and public fury that added up to something an actual ban could only envy. Her films, on the other hand, collided with bans of the entirely literal kind. The Common Council of Syracuse, New York, formally requested that every movie theater in the city refuse any film starring Bergman or directed by Rossellini, which means an American city government, in peacetime, asked cinemas to blacklist an actress over her love life. Let that one breathe. Restrictions of that flavor touched her films in certain other jurisdictions too, and between the localized censorship, the paralyzed studios, the hostile press, and the plain arithmetic of unemployability, any return to America turned financially and socially impossible. So no, America never banned Ingrid Bergman. America simply arranged conditions under which her presence turned untenable and her films contraband inside scattered city limits, then left her to draw the obvious conclusion. Historians call it de facto exile. I'd call it a ban with plausible deniability, and I suspect she noticed no practical difference from the real thing. The myth of a formal ban probably persists because the alternative sits less comfortably. A government decree can be repealed, blamed, filed under mid-century madness and forgotten, whereas a spontaneous nationwide shunning implicates rather more people. Blaming a law feels tidy. Admitting that ordinary moviegoers, newspaper editors, city councilors, and studio executives enforce the exile voluntarily feels far worse, so the thumbnail version survives. Untangling herself from Lindstrom required a legal odyssey across at least 3 countries, because international divorce law in 1950 apparently ran on pure spite. Bergman secured a Mexican proxy divorce in February of that year. Swedish courts refused to recognize it, and Italian law required Swedish certification that she remained free to marry, which left the couple wedged between 3 legal systems with no aisle in sight. The workaround reads like farce. On the 24th of May, 1950, Ingrid Bergman and Roberto Rossellini, married by proxy in Juarez, Mexico, with 2 attorneys signing the register on the couple's behalf, while the bride and groom stood elsewhere entirely. Somewhere in the Associated Press photo archive sits documentation of a wedding attended by neither participant. Romance by fan letter, marriage by power of attorney. Say what you like about the pair. They kept the paperwork thematically consistent. Twin daughters, Isabella and Isoda, arrived in June 1952, and the family settled into a working life conducted outside the Hollywood system that once revolved around Bergman's name. She starred in a run of films under Rossellini's direction through those years, Europa 51 and Journey to Italy among them. America shrugged at these pictures where it didn't sneer. Cinema history has since reversed that verdict completely, and the same films now sit among the acknowledged foundations of modern filmmaking, studied with reverence while the columns that mocked them line birdcages. Exile, for the record, never resembled a holiday. Bergman remained in Europe because Europe remained the only place willing to employ her, and the work she managed there arrived in America, when it arrived at all, carrying the full stink of the scandal. She kept working anyway, and whatever else the era confiscated, it never quite reached the profession itself. Savor the shape of that irony for a second. The country that exiled a woman for running off to shoot those films eventually enshrined the films themselves, while requiring another 2 decades to pardon the woman. Art, apparently, clears customs faster than forgiveness does. Moral panics burned fuel, and by 1956 the American supply ran low. Hollywood, sensing the temperature drop, cautiously tested the water. 20th Century Fox cast Bergman in Anastasia, filmed safely in Europe. No doubt so, any renewed eruption could erupt at a comfortable distance from the studio gates. No eruption arrived. Critics showered the performance with acclaim instead, and Bergman collected her second Academy Award for Best Actress. Notice what that statuette actually accomplished, though. The industry deployed the Oscar as an instrument of official pardon, a public signal that Bergman now counted as forgivable, after which she returned to America and resumed mainstream work without meaningful backlash. 6 years earlier, a senator branded her an influence for evil from the floor of Congress. Now the same country handed her its highest acting honor and applauded until its palms hurt. Nothing about Bergman changed in the interval. The national appetite for punishing her simply wore out, which tells you whose behavior this entire episode actually measured. The UN banning arrived without ceremony of any kind. Notice, no senator retracted anything in 1956, and no council in Syracuse withdrew its request so far as the record shows. From the churches came nothing resembling a reversal. America simply started clapping again and trusted everyone to forget the booing. Institutions rarely apologize in real time, and this one needed another 16 years plus an entirely different senator before it managed the trick, which brings us to 1972. The strangest chapter arrived last. On the 19th of April, 1972, 22 years after Johnson's performance, Senator Charles H. Percy of Illinois stood in the same chamber and entered a formal apology into the congressional record. Percy described Bergman as the victim of bitter attack in this chamber 22 years ago and expressed deep regret that congressional persecution forced her to leave this country at the height of her career. A congressional apology to an actress remains, to put it mildly, a rare collector's item. Bergman accepted publicly, remarking that the original attack weighed on her as a difficult burden across the years. Some ledgers refused to balance. What the apology never repaired, the 7 years legally severed from Pia, and the American career that should have unfolded across 2 lost decades. A correction in the congressional record repairs the record and nothing else, since the record never raised a child and never lived a single year of the exile it caused. So what remains once the myth burns off? Strip away the thumbnail version and the story rearranges itself into something far stranger. A ban that never existed on any statute book still cost a woman 7 years of her daughter and the exact stretch of life in which her stardom should have peaked. The husband, cast as the sainted victim, refused the divorce and barred the child. One senator demanded morality licenses for artists. Another, 22 years on, read the apology into the same record. Films a nation boycotted turned into foundation stones of modern cinema. Bergman herself never fit either costume the public stitched for her. Not the saint, invented from a handful of habit and armor rolls, and not the Scarlet Woman, invented the instant the first invention failed to hold. Somewhere between the two you find a working actress who wrote one slightly reckless fan letter and fell in love beside an inconvenient volcano, then paid for both on a scale no private failing could plausibly earn. Two things can be true. She broke her marriage, and her country broke faith with her far more thoroughly in return. Time repaired most of the damage eventually, as the apology entered the record and the films entered the canon. Only the years never came back. 7 of them belonged to a mother and a daughter, and no Oscar, no Senate apology, no restored reputation, and no critical rehabilitation ever returned a single one.